Investigators continue to look into a major crash Monday on I-10 by Sunland Park. 2 women were killed. They have not been identified. 6 others were hospitalized in the multi-vehicle crash. Police say the driver of a semi could not control his speed when traffic slowed down. And today we're talking about safety on the highway. There's a lot of construction taking place on El Paso roads. That means a lot of congestion in some cases. And joining us now is Bob Bielik, District Engineer for TxDOT. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So does construction make that area more hazardous?
It doesn't if people pay attention and slow down. It is more hazardous when there's 1 or 2 drivers out there who are trying to get 2 or 3 spaces ahead and weaving in and out of traffic. But as long as everyone slows down and pays attention, it's typically safer.
So it comes down to the human factor.
Certainly.
Well, but there's always distracted drivers. I mean,
yes.
Everywhere, right?
Right.
So you can't count on the perfect drivers because they're just, I don't think they're out there.
Right, and that's why we use the concrete barrier to separate drivers from workers. We try to put warning signs as early as possible, start to let people know that there's likely slowing traffic, or there's going to be lane shifts, or a lane is going to be closed. So we put a lot of that information out as early as possible to try to give drivers a heads up.
In this case, what's the earliest that TxDOT warns drivers of the upcoming traffic?
Well, typically, we start warning people 1 or 2 VMS signs. Those are the variable message signs, the big ones ahead of time. Okay. Typically, we'll have lower signing at a mile, a half mile, and a quarter mile before you have a lane closure or there's some sort of obstruction.
Mm-hmm. We spoke to some truck drivers yesterday when we were out gathering the story who said, you know, for a truck driver, that's just not enough warning to know that there's going to be congestion coming into El Paso. What would you say to that?
I'd say that I'd question whether they were professional drivers.
Okay. You know, that accident yesterday, really terrible, spanning between the east and the westbound lanes. When designing roadways, what do state engineers keep in mind to prevent sort of accidents like this?
Well, what we look at are design speeds, the radius of the curve, in other words, how sharp the curve is compared to the design speed, changes in vertical curves, the slopes that people are moving on, we take a look at that. Distractions, whether there's something to the side that's going to gather somebody's attention and take it away from the road. So where people are looking as they're driving. All of those issues we take into account in design. Now during construction you have to double down on that because now you have a lot of extra obstructions. You have a lot of movement going along as they're doing construction beside the road. At night you may have fairly heavy lighting, very bright lighting, which will distract people. So it gets much more difficult when you're in a construction area.
There's a bit of a sharp curve in that area. Now we did notice there have been fewer accidents in the last few years, or in the last, we should say, about 15 years in that area compared to the number of accidents there were there before. What do you attribute that decrease to?
Well, in general, although it seems counterintuitive, it's probably because congestion has increased. When congestion increases and cars slow down when they're closer together, drivers have a tendency to pay more attention because there's something right next to them. And when that occurs, you typically have a decrease in accidents.
Okay. Yesterday, the highway closed for 19 hours, major thoroughfare affecting tens of thousands of people. Obviously, that's not something that TxDOT can control. Perhaps that may be a misconception by some people. That's handled by the law enforcement agency investigating the crash. They decide when to reopen the thoroughfare. But from an engineer's perspective, that kind of closure for so long, how does it affect the city?
Well, it ties everything up in the city. The big challenge that we have in El Paso is we have no frontage roads from Mesa to KVIA, which means when we have an incident like occurred on Monday, there's no place to take people. You have to take people down to Donovan, or you have to take people off early on Mesa. So it's very, very difficult in those situations. Now, after we complete the Go 10 project, we actually will have collector distributor roads in that area, and we'll be able to take people off even if the main lanes are closed and keep traffic moving. It won't be great, but it'll be a lot better than it was the last couple of days.
A perfect example of how the Go 10 project will affect a situation like the one we saw.
Exactly.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Bielik. We really appreciate it.
Sure,
Thank you for
anytime.
coming in. All right.